And it's a complex problem. We are still learning about it. And although researchers that are coming out, they tend to deal with information which is out there in the public. So for instance, in the news, but there's a lot of stuff going on in private spaces, in WhatsApp groups, for instance, that we are not aware of because it's out of access. But we do know that it's a global problem, and it affects all mediums, be it print, electronic, and not just the internet. It's affecting the credibility of news organizations, although people still tend to still depend on their information-seeking behavior on news organizations. It's a problem that affects developing as well as developed countries. But it's a special challenge in societies which are untempered by civic norms. They are more susceptible to it. And fact checks alone are not enough. And we can talk about that. So I look at misinformation as a media problem, right? In fact, I go so far as to say that there's a fundamental issue with our understanding of the functions of media in society, right? Now, there are many ways to tackle media problems. Here I'm going to mention two, and then I'm just going to discuss one. So one is the critical perspective, and then there's a functional perspective. So what the critical perspective does is that you use it to understand the production processes behind media content, right? For instance, where's the advertising coming from? What are the various sources of funding of those producing content? How are they paying their staff? What are their salaries? And then how all these production processes reflect in the kind of content that is produced. The functional perspective is concerned with how media is used by people to extract benefits, such as information about society and culture from the content. So whereas the critical perspective looks at the production processes behind content, functional perspectives can be used to analyze content itself. Now, I want to focus on functional perspective more because it deals with content which is readily available, right? Not many people have time to go behind and understand, the processes that creates a story in New York Times. In fact, I would argue even researchers take a lot of time to come up with this kind of an analysis. So in this way, but content is easily available. So that is something that we can work with. Now, what is a functional perspective? According to this perspective, media performs certain functions. It provides intelligence for the public. It makes sure that intelligence is credible, contextualized, and transmits cultural values. I would also argue that media performs these functions in all societies, whether they be more of the communist media systems all the way to the capitalist or more liberally oriented free market media systems. However, the way they provide those functions might be different. And sometimes media does not perform these functions, and this is dysfunctional media. And what is a dysfunctional media? Well, it provides unnecessary status conferral to certain people, organizations, things. It can result in loss of critical ability for those consuming those media. It perpetuates inequalities in society and creates sensational content. Now, both media in all societies can be functional and dysfunctional, but it's a matter of degree to which it can be functional or dysfunctional. So what I'm going to do now is go into each of these aspects of functional and dysfunctional content. So the intelligence for the public role. Intelligence agencies, they serve as the eyes and ears of the government, the state. Media uh, serves as the eyes and ears of the people by providing them useful information about stock markets, oil prices, security issues, politics, cultural events, anything really that concerns uh, civil society. In journalism parlance, we can say that media presents information that is newsworthy. But in addition to providing credible, newsworthy information, it, media also has to provide information that is credible based on truthfulness, based on evidence. Let's connect this to functions with the examples I shared above. Okay. Were these media content newsworthy? Well, I would say yes. Warm water can kill coronavirus. It's a cheap method to kill rapidly spreading virus, so it's newsworthy, sure. And in the case of people traveling the world, it's a catchy way to explain a potential scale of a pandemic. And the mosque at Ground Zero controversy, it's an important symbolic event related to national trauma. So again, it has a high news value. But are these credible? Not necessarily. The UN, if anyone has followed UN advisory, they would know that it's difficult to kill the virus with that method. And the second two stories, the latter two stories, it is just misappropriation and incorrect use of information. All right. The other functions are contextualization and meaning making. Media industries interpret facts for us so we can better understand their significance. If you look at news reports, you will often see words such as meanwhile, or in addition to, or it must be said. So these are all pointers that then talk about contextualized information, often found right at the near the bottom of news reports. So can you think of any additional information that could have been provided in the examples I shared to make them more meaningful for the people? So it can be a question to address this. And the final function of media is to transmit cultural values because they help us adopt the behaviors and values of the society. They are sites of cultural production, just like films or theater, music. This is an image I'm sharing of a morning show from Pakistan to show an example of how nurturing children by women is a cultural value that is being transmitted through local Pakistani media. Now we are going to move on to dysfunctional media content. Just loss of critical ability, right? Now, relying too much on certain kinds of media can blunt our critical abilities. And I was just speaking to Naveen about it, that all media have certain blind spots, right? So it becomes, what is problematic is if we depend too much on only certain kinds of media, because that is where our perception of reality becomes warped. We can say that if we want to understand what truth is, we have to find as many different perspectives as possible and use our best guess and analysis about it. So here's an article from Owen Bennett Jones that maybe you can read. He takes a very interesting, easy to read critique about postmodernism over here. Another dysfunction is unnecessary status conferral. So generally, we believe that if you really matter, you will be the focus of the media spotlight. And in doing so, the media can raise the importance of something for better or for worse. They may deserve it or they may not. And one way to assess this is to ask ourselves when we see or consume any media content that um, are these issues here for an inexplicable reason? Coming back to the examples that I've highlighted, how truthful is the information shared in these examples? This is, one way to look at these. And this should these stories be given such airtime as they did? Another dysfunction is perpetuating the status quo. Because the media industry works within the ambit of the nation state, it is, of course, influenced by powerful interests. And this works in an implicit way. It's harder to detect. But there are ways to analyze it through representations, dominant narratives, censorship, self-censorship, emphasis or non-emphasis. I'm not going to dwell too much over this because I cannot, but there are other ways to look at other things too. For instance, this example of a very famous show from the US, and perhaps a decade later, the creator is talking about how it lacks diversity. And if I have any audience from Pakistan, they would be familiar with this series on which portrays a very human side of the military establishment. Okay, finally, media is dysfunctional if the content that comes out, the content that it produces is sensational. Now, entertaining content is often conflated with sensational content, and entertaining content is not necessarily bad. In fact, research tells us that political entertainment or entertaining content, satire perhaps, has kept the interest of young people alive regarding current affairs. And we have some examples to illustrate this. In Pakistan, we have a thriving ecosystem of key opinion leaders, funny key opinion leaders who are talking about social issues in a way that keeps younger audience engaged. And I would hazard a guess and say that there is a similar trend in the Arab world as well.